What's happening, folks? Back with another reaction, back with some more Beethoven, and we're back to finish his epic and quite famous Ninth Symphony as performed by the Vienna Philharmonic and conductor Karl Bohm in 1970, I believe. Certainly the 1970s. I'm forgetting the exact year in the moment, though I'm sure one of the previous videos in this series indicates it clearly. But yes, we are at the most famous movement, the movement which features the Ode to Joy. I believe technically it's a Presto, which, correct me if I'm wrong, I think essentially in terms of musical direction means quickly, maybe not in the same degree as something like a molto vivace, but at the same time I do believe it's supposed to be played with a degree of celerity. So yes, I mean, this piece has been used in many things over the years. Obviously, for those who know Clockwork Orange, this movement features very notably in that film based on the novel, which it's in the novel too, meaning it's not just something that was used for the soundtrack that has no connection to the novel. But yes, it is a piece that, despite that darker connection, speaks to the joy of life, which a lot of Beethoven's music does, and it's even more notable because his loss of hearing by this time in his career, not only that he could still compose something of this power and life-affirming quality, but that it features such resounding, triumphant joy. So in a time in his life when it was very difficult, both practically or professionally and emotionally, to come out with a symphony that flourishes and triumphs in the end with this type of movement, I think is just a testament to his creative spirit and the powerful positivity of a lot of his music. Now, of course, there's movements in different symphonies, like the second movement of his seventh, which feel very heavy and melancholic, but I think this movement speaks very much to Beethoven's music. So without further ado, let's finish off the Ninth Symphony as performed by the Vienna Philharmonic and conducted by Karl Bohm on the Deutsche Grammophon label. That little motif very much calling back to the second movement. And the opening hearkening a little to the first movement as well. does come back to me in the moment that when it really starts to kick off the fireworks of this section, it was used in the film Dead Poets Society, which I'm also very fond of, and in a more positive light than Clockwork Orange. makes me think of Clockwork Orange, especially, but I just love the unexpected sprightliness of it. Slower than I've heard other versions, other performances of this play this part. Bit of tension in this part. The violin dances on top of the vocals in that last part. transcendent and sacred sounding, this part. Somehow suspenseful and angelic at the same time. Again, multiple parts of this slower than I've heard other orchestras play it and sing it. Can I ever do another reaction again? I'm not sure. I mean, what a piece of music. It's definitely a classical lovers movement, meaning, I suppose if you're new to listening to classical music, it's asking a lot of the listener to be transfixed for that long, but ultimately, if you are into the genre, and especially if you like choral music, it's just a never-ending treat. It just keeps unfolding. I mean, so many things to say. I'll try to keep this relatively brief. I know you've already been here for a while, but if you're going to react to this movement to culminate this symphony, I feel like you have to say a lot. So first of all, I love the arrangement. I love the use of this massive and very dynamic chorus in conjunction with the orchestral part of the symphony, meaning I'm sure you could find other examples, but generally speaking, symphonies are played by orchestras and you don't hear voices, so already it's a little bit special in that regard. I do like the way we get some hints of earlier movements in the opening, which there is a degree of grandeur and scope to the first part of the final movement here, but it doesn't really give you an indication of how big and triumphant and grand and also sprightly it's going to be over the course of the duration. But then we get the Ode to Joy melody that comes in, first in instrumental form, and I love the way the brass gives you that power, that triumph, and the strings give you the elegance and the melody, and it's the two together that really make it so sonically pleasing. Then we get the first voice that comes in very low and deep. I don't know technically if it's a baritone. It sounds like it to me, but yes, a very low and deep male voice, very powerful. And then over the next couple minutes, we hear it sort of progress through, I think, the tenor range. Eventually, we definitely get some sopranos, high above everything else, and then we hear them in tandem or in combination, which I very much enjoy. And it does remind me, one of my mentors when I was in grad school, I am technically a historian, so I was in as an undergraduate and in grad school in the history department, and one of my mentors was a professor from Bavaria, surnamed Bergdorf. And I remember him talking about, someone joked about how German is a harsh language to hear people speak, and it was sort of a teasing joke toward Dr. Bergdorf, but he replied by saying, look, in some cases you might be right about that, but I challenge you to listen to sung German. And his argument was that however hard and consonant sounding the spoken language can be, when it's sung it goes to a different place and it has a different quality to it, and I love that. And indeed, a lot of operas are in Italian, and so it just has a different sound. So the lyrics to this being in German definitely gives it a distinct feel, and I agree with my old professor that sung German really does have a great quality to it. So I enjoy the sonic sound or the sonic dimension of the chorus, but also the lyrical and verbal part of the chorus as well. Then we get the real ode de joy triumphant explosion, which is fantastic. And then, as I said, it leads into that suddenly more minimal, not minimal in a independent sense, but definitely compared to what we've just heard, and it becomes sprightly and light and a bit, what's the right word? It almost sounds like something you'd hear in the Renaissance. It sounds a bit throwback, and then even that develops and gets a bit more rich as it goes along, and then eventually we find our way back to a fuller orchestral arrangement, and then finally that racing to the end choral part at the end. And I have to mention, shout out to all the Notame Cantabile fans out there. There's a part in when she goes to Europe where she's excited because she thinks she's going to play the Celesta. It turns out not to happen, so it's a bit of a bummer in the narrative. But she's excited about it, and as she's going to the concert hall to perform it, or so she thinks, she's thinking of that final choral part and just imagining the grandeur in relation to the way she sees the world and what she thinks she's about to do. And so when I hear that part, my brain definitely goes to that connection or association. But I do love the way it just really ramps up the speed and the intensity. As I mentioned, speaking of the tempo, there's a couple parts in there, including the Ode to Joy part the second time it comes around, as well as that sprightly section that were definitely played slower than I've heard them in some other performances of this movement. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it stands out to me here because it's notably slower than some other versions I've heard. So again, as I talked about with the first movement and certainly with the second movement, if you hear a concert, or if you hear a symphony played a certain way, the first time you hear that symphony, that sort of imprints on you. And so hearing different tempos or different conduction from other orchestral performances under different conductors, it can just give it a bit of a weird sound just because you heard it, you're used to it in a different form. So it definitely stood out to me that some of the parts were a bit slower, but like I said, not in a bad way. So in the end, shout out to Beethoven. What a piece to compose as you're essentially deaf for all practical purposes. What a movement to finish this grand symphony off with. What innovation, the way he uses the chorus, the way he combines the different parts or sections of the orchestra, and just gives us this bountiful sonic feast over the course of nearly 30 minutes. So just an amazing performance. Shout out to Karl Bohm, shout out to the Vienna Philharmonic Orchestra, shout out to any of you who've watched this whole video as well as watched the other movements. And if you don't know, I reacted to the 7th Symphony in this compilation. I reacted to, I think, the Eroica with a different orchestra and conductor. It was a CD collection. Nevertheless, I have a lot of other Beethoven reactions in my classical music playlist, so check them out. I'm going to go through my collection, take some time selecting what piece will come next, but the classical music reactions will continue, so hopefully you're there for that. Let me know what you think of this, and I will see you next time. Peace.